Today I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the mysteries of God. I can't tell you how many times in the early years of my faith I asked God if He would only give me an answer to some theological mystery, that I'd be able to have much greater faith in Him. And I have to admit that things really didn't work out as I thought, since once that question was resolved in my mind, I had another one waiting for answers. My faith always seemed to be second to my knowledge. Now, this didn't make me a bad person. It just meant that I was what Jesus would have called one of little faith. I have to admit that I don't have answers to every theological question about God. I don't think anybody does or ever did. And remember, even Jesus said that He didn't know the time that was appointed for His second coming. That was only for the Father to know. The Bible teaches us that we're not really to seek after those theological questions at the expense of faith. Actually, the Bible teaches us that many times faith itself is the answer. Take the case of Abraham. Now, Abraham was never given an explanation as to why he had to face this moral dilemma when God told him to murder his son as a sacrifice to offer to God. It was an act against the law, and it was considered to be immoral all throughout the existence of the Jewish faith. Yet God asked Abraham to do this in order to remain obedient, and it was required to establish a covenant that God would have with Abraham. Of course, in the end, God prevented Abraham from completing this act of murder. But the point is that God never gave Abraham a real explanation as to why He expected him to do this. We also read that God never explained to Job why he had to go through all that suffering. As you read the book of Job, the reader, of course, gets the explanation, but Job himself was simply told to trust God. And Jesus tells us that we really are not to put God to the test. Luke chapter 4, verse 12 and 13, Jesus says this. Jesus answered him, "It is said, you are not to put the Lord your God to the test." So when the devil has completed every temptation, he departed from him until a more opportune time. The lesson there was that Satan can try to mislead using scriptures and get us to do things that would even test God. The way that believers are counseled to handle such questions is that we have to first get closer to God if we even want to be able to ask the questions. And our faith must be above reproach, which means that our faith must be above blame or disapproval. But many times the answers that we're going to get are that we simply need to pursue faith more. How many times did Jesus accuse His disciples of having little or small faith? The reason that they didn't understand what was happening to them was because they didn't have faith that was strong enough to rise above their doubt. Paul says that the explanation he got from God about the thorn in his flesh in Corinthians was that God's grace would be sufficient. Now, this takes place in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verse 9. "And he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, and my strength is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, most gladly I will rather boast in my infirmities, that the power of Christ may rest upon me." There's a lot to be said about the role of our weakness in revealing the strength of God that's often ignored. Weakness creates in us the need for faith in God. We know that no one or anything really wants to suffer and die because we're born with a desire to survive and to avoid pain. But the reality is that life and death are really in the hands of God, not men. We have to remember that the measure of the value of life is not necessarily longevity, but rather a quality of obedience that's set by God. God may choose that by our suffering and our death, he's going to show the indifference of evil, such as cancer or other diseases, as well as natural disasters, or even show that Christians can be victims of crime, even to the point of death. And the mature believer understands that God's teaching is more important than even life itself. In order to understand why God does what he does, we would have to be divine, for we exist in a world that's limited by time. We can't see into the future, and our past is cloudy because it's only as accurate as it was historically recorded. And this certainly puts limits on accuracy on our understanding. We've also been warned not to place knowledge above faith, because if we do, we become nothing more than Gnostics. Now, Gnostics were those people, and are those people today, who believe that if you don't believe in their special knowledge of God, you can't enter into heaven. Just think about science for a minute. Now, in science, we really can't understand why certain things might happen, even if they seem to be contradictory, or especially if they're contradictory. Most times, we probably can't even understand the question in science unless we've got advanced degrees in physics, astronomy, or chemistry. Why shouldn't it be the same for divine mysteries? Do we deny science simply because they can't answer all our questions? And there's a great value that's being missed about mystery in our religion. We need divine mystery in order to keep us submissive toward God in a position of fear and respect. It's a kind of wisdom knowing that we're not divine. Proverbs 1:7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge, but fools despise wisdom and instruction." We need to understand greater the importance of preserving divine mysteries, rather than trying to solve them as though understanding God were some kind of a puzzle that we solve. Even the idea of understanding God sounds ludicrous. Perhaps we need to revive a word that's taken upon itself a rather negative meaning because of its abuse. The word is mystic, which actually means a person who seeks by contemplation and self-surrender to obtain unity with or absorption into the deity or the absolute, or who believes in the spiritual apprehension of truths that are beyond the intellect. Today, many think that they've answered all the mysteries of God through their theologies, which has come to be known as systematic theology. But take, for example, the life of St. Thomas Aquinas, and why he aborted his work, which is called the Summa Theologica. This work is composed of 22 volumes and over 7,000 pages in English of theology and theological answers. And on December 6th, 1273, the prolific writer laid aside his pen and would write no more. On that day, when Thomas Aquinas was celebrating Holy Communion during the feast of St. Nicholas, he received a revelation that so affected him that he called his principal work, Summa Theologica, as nothing more than straw, and he left it unfinished. Pious tradition holds that Aquinas received the foretaste of the beatific vision, a mere glimpse of eternity in heaven, where God revealed to him that all his efforts to describe God that is, fell so far short that he resolved to never write again. And when his friend and his secretary tried to encourage Aquinas to write more, Aquinas replied, "I can do no more. The end of my labors has come. Such things have been revealed to me that all that I have written seems to me as so much as straw. Now I await the end of my life, and after that of my works." So it's really that simple. Some things are beyond our intellect, although there are many who won't admit it. After all, it took me many years to figure this out for myself. So thank you for listening. I hope that this encourages you to focus more on faith, and there's no shame in focusing upon faith over knowledge. It's the human part of us that wants to make us feel more knowledgeable for the sake of our own vanity and our own ego. But we don't exist in the realm of ego and vanity. We exist in the realm of humility. So thanks for listening again, and if you have any questions or comments, please leave them. And if you have a chance, please give me a thumbs up if you enjoyed this sermon. Thank you, and blessings to all.